I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation, love that turns deadly. We begin with the story of Lori and Charles Vallow, a couple who fell in love and lived a very comfortable life, raising Lori's daughter from a previous marriage and adopting an awesome little boy named JJ. But then that love died, and so did Charles. Here's the story. Charles Vallow, a successful businessman, married Lori in 2006. They raised their blended family, including 2 adopted children, Tylee Ryan, Lori's daughter from a previous marriage, and Joshua J.J. Vallow. From the outside, they seemed like a happy couple, but their relationship deteriorated in the late 2010s as Lori became obsessed with doomsday religious beliefs, influenced by doomsday author Chad Daybell. In early 2019, Charles filed for divorce, claiming Lori believed she was a divine figure tasked with preparing for the end of the world. He also alleged that she threatened his life. Then on July 11th, 2019, Charles was shot and killed by Lori's brother, Alex Cox, who claimed self-defense. No charges were filed at the time. Following Charles' death, Lori moved to Idaho, where Chad Daybell lived. In September of 2019, her children, Tylee and JJ, disappeared. Lori married Chad in November, just weeks after Chad's wife, Tammy Daybell, died under suspicious circumstances. Concerned relatives pushed authorities to investigate. Then by June of 2020, Tylee and JJ's remains were found buried on Chad's property. Lori and Chad were arrested and charged with murder. In 2023, Lori was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, and now she is charged with the murder of Charles Vallow and is waiting for her trial to begin. Lori Vallow, now known as Lori Daybell, but I want to go back to the days of Lori Vallow, because when she met Charles and they got married, they really had a happy life. He was head over heels for her. She seemed to be very much in love with him, and he was a much better husband than her prior relationships that she had had. And it seemed like this was the forever couple for Lori Daybell, who had been in and out of a bunch of marriages prior to meeting Charles. And they were together longer than she had been with anyone else. But shortly after Charles died, she married Chad Daybell. And this guy is the doomsday prophet. This is someone that she met at one of those doomsday preppers meetup get-togethers. He was an author, a very prolific author of self-published books. And Lori had read his books and was enamored with him because of who he was, what he was saying, and he was enamored with her, perhaps because of her looks. I don't know if he had ever had someone with the long, wavy blonde hair and blue eyes come approach him, but then they ended up together. Now, I mentioned he was a writer. So he had written a sort of like a romance kind of novel about 2 fictional characters who really weren't fictional characters. These characters were really based upon Chad and Lori. So this writing by Chad, we have now, we're going to play for you, and basically you'll hear it read. It's sort of a dramatic reading of something that was written by Chad Daybell about these 2 characters, James and Elena, but James and Elena are really Chad and Lori. Take a listen.
But on the morning of October 26th, James arrived in St. George, still a bit baffled by the message he had received. MG introduced James to her friend Elena. When their hands touched, he felt a shock pass through him and his heart started beating fast. He had glimpses of them walking dusty paths together, and he realized they had been married during the life of Jesus Christ, and they had been very close to him. At this time, their spirits could not be restrained any longer, and a long-awaited makeout session took place in that lobby. This was manifest in the mortal world to James and Elena through the scientific phenomenon known as loin fire. As they talked, James had a burning desire to make love to her, but he wasn't sure she felt the same way. The erotic tension continued throughout the afternoon. James could only think of her. His desire for her was indescribable. Thankfully, she had worn 16 layers of clothing to survive the 80-degree weather, so he was not fully aware that she truly had the body of a goddess. Her dimensions were exactly what he had always fantasized about, but that revelation would have to wait a month. They would both attend the same event in mid-November, and it seemed like that day would never arrive. He knew they had been married before, and they had been close friends with the Savior when he lived in Jerusalem. That relationship was now meant to continue in this lifetime. They hungered for each other, and he leaned forward and fulfilled a promise he had made to her a few days earlier. He gently kissed her tender lips, and the same heavenly electricity filled his entire body. The passionate magic they had felt many centuries earlier came surging back powerfully. James moved to the couch, and Elena straddled him effortlessly, as if they had done this thousands of times before. She fit perfectly on him, and they pressed their loins tightly against each other. They were still fully clothed, but the intensity of the intimacy was undeniable.
That's intensity, right? Well, that's Chad and Lori. But let's go back and think about her prior marriage. And that brings us to the question in our investigation, our first one. Lori and Charles, how did their love go wrong? What happened? What happened? Joining me, forensic psychiatrist, author, and columnist, Dr. Carol Lieberman, and retired police commander, religious cult expert, host of the podcast Profiling Evil, and author of the book Deceived, Mike King. All right, Dr. Carol Lieberman. How did it go wrong for Lori and Charles? I mean, Charles provided everything for her. He was head over heels for her. Head over heels.
That was the problem. Lori needed more excitement. She needed more of a challenge. She needed someone who would write those kinds of poems, essentially, to her. It was poetic. And, you know, it's kind of an old story of a bad girl and a good guy. And Charles it was nice. She was with him longer than anybody else, but it got to be too boring after a while. And then she got so involved in the religion and she started reading these books. And for her, you know, just like the blonde hair, for her husband, for Chad, well, not her husband at the beginning, but for Chad, just the same kind of extreme attraction. She was extremely attracted to somebody who had such adoration, you know, who was somebody in this religion, and that made her elevated to be somebody.
Mike King, how did their love go wrong here? What are your thoughts about Charles? And I look at Charles, and he really wanted it to work. I've seen things were happening, and Lori seemed like she was, you know, breaking down, and he still was attempting to try to help her. And we've spoken with relatives, and they tried to intervene. What are your thoughts here?
You know, Vinny, this one, as I've watched it, the thing that it boils down to, in my opinion, is that Lori always was in pursuit of having more light and knowledge, more inspiration or right to inspiration than anyone else, a more glorified or a respected position. She wasn't happy with the idea of taking care of a little kid, especially one with special needs. And she wasn't really happy about a doldrum, regular life like the rest of us must be living, with a companion that seems to fight just as hard as you do in this thing. And you think about Charles, and you think about some of those videos we watched on body cam where he's talking to police officers, and you could see that he is beside himself. He's seeing his life kind of crumbling around him, and he's seeing this woman who's pretty dang wacky in the kinds of things that she's talking to him about, whether it's calling him Ned or saying that other people are zombies. But all of a sudden, she's not satisfied. And then she catches this glimpse of Chad Daybell, who promises her, yeah, you really are something special. And boy, if he manipulated her, he did a great job at it. But she also found a goofy bounder that would listen to her and go in and go along with all of her ideas. And so what they became is fuel and fire. And that exploded into an inferno that just caused so much damage in the wake.
I want to listen to a little bit more of the romance novel.
Elena graciously allowed James to stay in a spare bedroom at her home that night. James anxiously hoped Elena would join him in the spare room. It took a while for everyone to settle into their beds, but once the house quieted down, James opened his door slightly and saw the wondrous sight of Elena approaching the room. They locked the door behind her and quickly got under the covers. They clung to each other and kissed desperately, hungrily. James placed his hands under her top and caressed her splendid breasts. She moaned happily and wrapped her legs around his waist. Only 2 layers of material separated their loins, and they could feel each other's most intimate body parts in detail. They knew their spirits were actually intimately joined together, and it felt like they had left the celestial world. They fit together perfectly, and their kisses were deep and frenzied. Their desire for each other was beyond compare.
Dr. Carol Lieberman, do you think Chad actually believed what he was writing there, or is he writing what he believes Lori wants to hear?
No, I think he really felt those things. It seemed very
the loin
honest.
fire?
Yes. I mean, obviously these are romantic words, very sort of exaggerated kinds of words. But yes, I think he did feel that. And, she was someone who was always in pursuit of excitement. I don't think it was so much about religion. I mean, yes, of course, that was part of it and all that. I mean, that's how she got to him. But it was excitement. I mean, all these marriages that she had, for example, someone doesn't go from one marriage to another marriage to another marriage that quickly and that many, unless they're pursuing the excitement of the newness. The next relationship is new and exciting and so on. And then, of course, Chad was the most exciting relationship she had ever had.
Yeah, it's not. Mike, we have like 10 seconds. I'll let you wrap it up.
I love being on with Carol. The other thing that she really loved, Vinnie, was power and control. And this thing was really about power and control for her.
Mike King,
Yes.
Thank you so much. Great to see you. Love the sweater. Coming up next, Kouri and Eric. How did their love go wrong?
If I was divorced right now and asked you to marry me tomorrow, would you? I just want to lay on the couch and cuddle you, watch a murder documentary and snuggle.
She met up with acquaintance 2 at a Maverick gas station in Draper and purchased from him 15 to 30 round green-blue pills, which she understood to be fentanyl.
There was no fentanyl or traces of fentanyl found in the home anywhere.
1 or 2 pills might be accidental. 20 or 5 times the lethal dose is not accidental, Your Honor. That is someone who wants Eric dead.
Since Eric's death, we have learned and unfortunately are continually reminded that Kouri is desperate, greedy, and extremely manipulative. We have watched as Kouri has paraded around portraying herself as a living widow and victim while trying to profit from the death of my brother.
Our next couple, Eric and Kouri Richins. So what's the backstory here? Well, Eric was a very successful business person, has his own company. He's at Home Depot one day. Kouri's working at Home Depot, meets her. They fall in love and they start a family. And they've got these beautiful children. And from the outside, everything looks great for this young, good-looking couple. But now she's accused of giving him a Moscow mule laced with fentanyl and killing him. There's a lot of evidence in this case, but something that has surfaced is a text message that Kouri Richins sent to her paramour or boyfriend. And this text message, allegedly from the time that Eric was still alive. I want you to take a listen as we read that text message.
If I was divorced right now and asked you to marry me tomorrow, would you? I just want to lay on the couch and cuddle you, watch a murder documentary and snuggle. I want you today, every day, not just sexually, but physically, mentally. Every day when I wake up, I do want a future together. I do want you. Figure life out together. If you could just go away and you could just be here, life would be so perfect. I love you. I have a crazy dream. You quit your job, I divorce and come up with millions and millions. We buy Midway and live in the guest house and rent out the huge house as a big event center. $15,000 a day like they charge down the road. Maybe $12,000 to stay competitive, and we will just run the event center as our daily job and hang out every day, raise some kids, have a little farm. Deal? To me, you're worth millions a year. I'm honored to be your friend, best friend actually, lover, go-to. Life is going to be different, I promise. You're one hell of a patient person. I hate your hard days. I wish I could be there to turn them around for you. Can I try Friday? Give me a few days. Hang in there until then, please. Love you.
It seems pretty clear from that text message that she is checked out of her marriage and her relationship, which brings us to the next question in our investigation. That's about Kouri and Eric. Like, Kouri and Eric, how did their love go wrong? What happened here? Still with me, forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Carol Lieberman, and joining me, attorney representing victim Eric Richins' family, Greg Skordas is with us. Greg, from your perspective, how did their love go wrong here? This young couple, beautiful family. It seemed like, like a storybook romance.
I don't know, Vinny, if there was ever love there from Kouri's perspective. I mean, Eric was a hardworking man. He was a good-looking man, a strong man, but I think she saw him as a source of money and nothing else. And she was always looking around for something more exciting and more, invigorating maybe than he was, because he just wanted to be a father and a husband and take care of his children and sort of take care of the community. And that letter that the email that you just read, she said that she was glad that her paramour was patient, but Kouri rather was not patient at all. I'm thinking of Lori Vallow still, but Kouri Richins was not patient at all, and she just couldn't stand to spend another day with him, and did what she needed to do so that she could attempt to get his money.
Dr. Carol Lieberman, how are you looking at all this? How did their love go wrong, or was there no love?
Well, I agree with your other guest. It's interesting in the story with Lori and Charles. I think she did love him to a point, perhaps more than the other husbands. But then when Chad came along, that's what was the interrupter. That's what gave her. That's what excited her a lot more. In this case. With Kouri, I don't think she loved him at all from the beginning. He was a meal ticket. And remember, she was working in Home Depot, and he came in, and a friend introduced them, and she saw him as, wow, they're talking about bad girls, and he was the sitting duck, and then she started stealing his money. This was a slow death. They married in 2013, and she killed him. She tried twice. The second time she succeeded in 2022. And so it was a slow death. I think all along she was planning on getting rid of him. And it was kind of lasting for as long as she could use his money. She kept sneaking his money to buy houses, for her flipping business. And then he started getting wind of it. Now, if he had an unlimited amount of money and she could have kept stealing money, she might not have killed him in 2022.
Greg, how do you see this case in terms of the motive or the alleged motive behind the poisoning with the Moscow Mule?
Oh, it's money, money, money. I mean, I guess you could add sex and power into that, but it was just a way of getting rid of him. And I'll tell you something else. Once Eric started talking about divorce, or maybe separating, she realized that she was worth far more she would be get a lot more as a widow than she would as a divorcee. And that wasn't hard for her to figure out. That is to say that if he died, she would get much more of his estate than had they divorced. The math was simple for her, and she just got impatient. I mean, she would have made a fortune just in terms of the divorce, but you know how people are. When you can get $1 million, why not go for 2 or something like that? And I think her greed just became so overwhelming that she took the steps she needed to take to get as much of that money as she could.
Dr. Carol Lederman, we have about 20 seconds left here. Do you think if she had gotten away with it and didn't get arrested, she would be with that paramour today?
Probably, until she got bored with him. But, she had bought a house. She put money down on a house, and she owed a lot of money, and she needed to make up for it, and she was expecting to make up for it by the insurance money on his death, on Eric's death. And in their prenup, this was the problem. Eric should have realized, or it would have been good if he realized, there was a prenup where she would get more of the assets if he died when they were married, as opposed to being divorced. So, this, as I said, this was like a long coming death.
Big thank you, Dr. Carol Lederman and Greg Skordas. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Up next, Chris and Shanann Watts. How did their love go wrong?
He told me that he was living in the basement, and he said, we're separated, but we're not divorced, and we're going to get ready to sell the house. And that was the impression that I was under.
I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of love that turns deadly. Next up, the story of Chris and Shanann Watts, a good-looking young couple who moved from North Carolina out to Colorado and started a family. But when Chris's family disappeared, it became the nation's #1 true crime mystery. Here's the story. The story of Chris and Shanann Watts is one of love, betrayal, and tragedy. Shanann Watts was a thriving businesswoman and a dedicated mother to her daughters, Bella and Celeste. Chris Watts, her husband, appeared to be a loving father and a supportive partner. They lived in Frederick, Colorado, and seemed to have the perfect life. However, behind closed doors, their marriage was crumbling. By the summer of 2018, Chris had begun an affair with a co-worker, Nicole Kessinger. He became distant from Shanann, who was pregnant with their third child, a son they planned to name Nico. On August 13, 2018, after Shanann returned from a business trip, she seemingly vanished along with her daughters. Initially, Chris played the role of a worried husband, pleading for his family's safe return. However, inconsistencies in his story led to investigators to suspect him. After failing a polygraph test, he confessed to the killings. Chris murdered Shanann in their home and then smothered their daughters and disposed of their bodies in oil tanks at a work site. Shanann was buried in a shallow grave nearby. In November of 2018, he pleaded guilty to multiple counts of first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. You know, there are a lot of defendants that are hated in stories and tragedies and grisly murders we cover here on Court TV. This guy is very close to the top of the list. Very, very close. I want to begin and just show you Shanann and those beautiful little girls that were taken. I don't understand any of this. It's difficult, I think, for any of us to understand why you would go to that extreme and take the lives of these two little angels and the mom who's carrying a third child, a mom who is so dedicated to her family, and a mom who was working hard to support that family. Anyhow, I want to show you Chris Watts, the killer. Here he is on police body cam, and this is when his wife and his children are missing.
you guys been married? So, been together 8 years, married 6 years. Okay. This is very unusual behavior.
Which is on the camera right here.
Okay. So when you guys come home, do you usually use the front door, the garage door? How do you guys?
I usually open the garage door, come in.
Okay.
She's front of the garage, just kind of thing.
Okay. Is that a ring out there?
Oh, that was.
No, the doorbell, is that a ring?
Yeah, like when you got a visitor, it does. But I don't think the speaker is on where you hear it. Like by.
Okay. I guess my question for you is, would it show her leaving with the kids? Did you have any alerts?
If she came out here, yeah.
Did you have any alerts today with that?
Just when her friends were here.
Does it only record when the doorbell rings, or anytime someone?
If you're like right here, it should just start. The proximity should hit up.
Okay. And if you have anything on that today?
Just her friends.
Putting on a show. He put on the show for everybody. He was talking to local news. You know, he put on this whole facade until it began to crumble. And the reason it crumbled is because the truth was slowly uncovered, including the fact that he was cheating on his wife, that he had a girlfriend. Nicole Kessinger is her name. Here she is being interviewed by police.
It was just talking at work. It was pretty casual. And he didn't have a wedding ring on his finger. And every time I talked to him, he didn't tell me that he was in a relationship. He didn't even mention his kids right away either. And then one day he told me that he had 2 kids. I was like, that's pretty cool. And started telling me about his kids.
That sounded like a sarcastic comment.
No, I thought it was kind of cute. I was like, oh, he's a dad. It was like right around Father's Day too. So whenever that is in June.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I'm not good with holidays.
He told me he had kids, and then it was Father's Day shortly after that. So that's what I do now. And I was like, I thought it was cute. And then he's telling me about him. He's pretty excited about him. And then he mentioned that he did have a significant other. And then he told me that those 2 were in the process of a separation.
Typical story, right? There was no process of separation. That wasn't happening. She was carrying their 3rd child. Shanann had no idea about any of this. So all of this brings us to the next question in our investigation about our 3rd couple. Chris and Shanann, how did their love go wrong? What happened here? And how did it end up the way it did? Joining me, psychotherapist and author of the book, The Minds of Mass Killers, Understanding and Interrupting the Pathway to Violence, Siobhan Scott, and defense attorney, former head prosecutor Bob Bianchi. Thank you both. Siobhan, what are your initial thoughts here about Chris Watts and what is going on, and what is it that would take him to this extreme?
Yeah, the real tragedy is that Shanann had no idea who Chris was. She didn't know the man she was married to. And that's because psychopathic people are really good at role-playing and wearing masks. We know he was a liar. He was very good at deception. He had no empathy. He obviously had no guilt. He was impulsive and yet had superficial charm and could manipulate women very well, probably manipulated a lot of people, and he was prone to rage. That is a classic psychopath, and the tragedy is just impossible to wrap our minds around, but I think Shanann had no idea that this is the man that she thought she was in love with.
Bob, I want to play Shannon's mom, who was giving a victim impact statement, which I think really speaks volumes about everything that was going on here.
Our daughter Shanann loved you with all of her heart. Your children loved you to the moon and back. Shannon's family was her world. Shanann put a crown on your head. But unfortunately, the day that you took their life, God removed that crown. We loved you like a son. We trusted you. Your faithful wife trusted you. Your children adored you, and they also trusted you.
Bob Bianchi, this is the real theme to me, is this broken trust. right? The family trusted him. Obviously, Shanann trusted him. She was raising a family with him. And we know the kids. We know the kids. They look up to their dad. They trust him. They look to him and to mom for everything. And all that trust is broken. Like, how does this happen?
Yeah, Vinny, I think you hit the nail on the head. We've been doing this for a long time. I certainly have as an in-court trial prosecutor in homicide cases. And when this case was going on, I remember commenting on TV that this was literally, between my TV career and my legal career, I think one of the most heinous, cold-blooded, atrocious murder cases that I have ever witnessed or ever seen. And what disturbed me also from a legal point of view is we never really got the why. The real motive, the real question. The prosecutor, in my opinion, dropped the ball here by not requiring a proffer session to be done where he would give a full and detailed description of why and how this all happened. But in the end, Vinny, as is typical, the lawyers afterwards decided to go on Dr. Phil and places like that. So we start to be able to put the pieces together. And I think this is actually as simple as this. I don't think it was a premeditated thing. He got into an argument with her about the divorce. The reality hit. He killed her, and little baby Bella came into the room. She saw the murder happen, and he took those two kids. He killed Cece first, and then Bella was like, please don't do to me, Daddy, essentially what you did to Cece, and he strangled the life out of both of his children so as not to be caught for the murder of his wife. It's as simple as that. He's a punk. But what happened ultimately with regard to this case is a sad and sick tragedy. And these families, in my opinion, will never get the closure they really need because we never really got the real answers directly from him. So the love went wrong, Vinny. I think it's just as simple as this. He didn't want to get caught.
Yeah. Siobhan, Scott, we have about 15 seconds on this one. Do you think he would ever give up the entire truth at any point of the rest of his life?
I would doubt it because he has told himself a story. And as all psychopathic people do, they come up with reasons and rationales for their behavior that they believe. And I doubt that he's ever going to, share more than that, what he's already said, which isn't much.
All right. Our guests are staying with us. Still to come, Ali and Ana. How did their love go wrong?
So as far as the friend saying I pushed him, I don't recall these things.
Slapping.
Her friends?
Slapping Ana.
I would never do that in public. I mean, I never did that.
It was the biggest story in the world.
People saw the facts differently.
Somebody manufactured evidence in this case.
This was kind of a crazy spectacle.
This case is a circus. He was an icon.
They are in for the fight of their lives.
Everybody thinks you're guilty.
Trial and Error. Why did O.J. win? Premieres Sunday night, 8 Eastern and Pacific. Only on Court TV.
Welcome back. I want you to take a look at this. There's a man named Ana Abulaban. Ana Abulaban is his name. We covered his trial here on Court TV. Married to a beautiful woman named Ana. But he was a guy who became sort of TikTok famous. Take a look.
Can you please say hello to my little friend? Okay. I play with you. Do I play rough? Okay. Say hello to my little friend.
The Scarface one.
Okay. How are you? I want you to be the love of my life.
You think I wanted that?
Or if I'm your daughter, I wanted it. Who the is you?
Mr. Mr. Politan, I need you to stop.
I'm gonna let this destroy.
Mr. Politan, I need you to stop.
I want to be here. This is here. Kissing Ray on my couch. With his feet on my table. With my Anthony, my cousin, my wife, in the house of my daughter sleeps in on the furniture that I put together. What do you expect a man to feel?
Slightly unhinged. I mean, that's putting it mildly, Ana Abulaban. But you go back in time, he was married to his wife, Ana. and he became TikTok famous, and then kind of got a little taste of that celebrity, people recognizing him, and he starts cheating on his wife, and it becomes a real problem. They have a little young daughter, and they end up getting separated. And after the separation, he starts some surveillance of her, and then one day goes to her apartment because he wasn't living there, and she's there with a friend, and I'll let him describe what happens.
I didn't expect that Ana would ever do that to me. Him, of all people. I mean, she knew how I felt about him. She knew how I felt. I was trying to believe her. I was trying to believe that she wasn't cheating on me, that she would let me fix this, because I was sick. I was struggling from drugs and mental illness, and I a lot, but I was trying to fix this. And when I saw that it was him, I couldn't take it. I couldn't take the betrayal. I couldn't believe that she could do that to me, to our daughter. And then before I could stop myself, I just snapped. My gun was in my hand, and next thing I'm shooting, and I can't stop. I'm just shooting, and I'm even startled. It's like I'm watching it happen. I'm like I'm in the passenger seat of my own body. I can't stop it, and I hear Ana screaming and crying. And I don't even remember shooting Ana. I just remember running back to the front door, and I grabbed the door handle, and then it hit me. I'm like, did that just happen? And I turn around, and I see Ana leaning forward, and there's blood. And I'm like, Ana. I couldn't believe I did that. I don't know. I didn't mean to do that.
You know, they're snapping, but he said, I snapped and I had a gun in my hand. Like, he brought the gun with him. So let's talk about this couple. Brings us to the next question in our investigation. Ollie and Ana, how did their love go wrong? Because, I mean, there was a point where they seemed very, very happy, but then he became a celebrity. Still here with us, psychotherapist Siobhan Scott and defense attorney Bob Bianchi, former head prosecutor. Siobhan, I mean, I am no expert, but I see obsession, I see jealousy, I see rage. But what is that where does that all come from? And this is the guy who became famous. He was the one cheating on her. He's the one that broke up this relationship. So what happened here?
He just oozes malignant narcissism. This is a guy that's in love with himself, and I think it's that narcissism that drove him to become a TikTok celebrity. He really is an actor, and as the judge said at one point in the trial, he was very good at it. He was very believable. But the rage, the urge to dominate, to control her, he saw her as an extension of himself. He had this sense of entitlement that he owned her, and this pattern of abuse had gone on for a long time. So even in the times that it looked like they were happy, my guess is that this was part of the cycle of violence where they have honeymoon periods. But this was a very scary guy, and she was trying to get out of the relationship. And we know that 60% of women who are murdered by a violent partner, and 80% of those are murdered when they're trying to leave. And so he fits the pattern.
Yeah, Bob, that is the other part of this, right? She knew that this guy was no good. She was trying to get away. She was trying to protect herself and her daughter, and this was the result.
Yeah, Vinny, I mean, she sent a text that day, which I think was the breaking point, that I want nothing to do with you, essentially was what the text had said. And I agree with the doctor. He was losing control. He is a narcissist. He cannot lose control, both from the standpoint of how it looks to the public, but moreover to his own ego. And we always said in the business, Vinny, today's domestic violence is tomorrow's homicide. And unfortunately, at least in my experience, 50% or more of the homicides that I've had emanated from this cycle of domestic violence situation that we have here. by all accounts, she was a very gentle soul, a very good person, and tried to stick with this guy. He abused her. The tapes that came out in court were absolutely atrocious. He even had to admit what he had said to her that came out in the previous domestic violence was horrible. Last point here, him on the witness stand, let's talk about tactics. They had to put him on the stand because they got to get this passion provocation defense out. And that can only come out through his words, because he's got to be able to explain to the jury that he was provoked and that it was reasonable, both objectively and subjectively. So he's got to talk about how he's so overwhelmed. But like you indicated, he brought the gun to the fight. And that acting that people say he's a good actor, I disagree completely. You're sitting there crying and your voice quivering and you're wiping your eyes without a tear. I think the jury saw right through it.
Yeah, watching this guy, Siobhan, how are there clues about someone? Like, does someone show themselves before it gets to this point, or is it just a gradual buildup? And because it's a gradual buildup over time, you don't necessarily expect this to happen.
Yeah, it's usually gradual over time, and these kind of people are really adept at manipulation. And there's always this honeymoon period. If there's been an anger blow up, and they'll apologize, they'll cry, they'll say I'll never do it again, and then they always have an excuse. And they're very good at blaming the woman for, if you just wouldn't have complained about my music, I wouldn't have broken the stereo or whatever. And so they play a lot of mental mind games, and it can really confuse the victims. But at some point, many women do become aware that something is terribly wrong here, but they also know that that means they're in increased risk of danger if they try to leave. So it really is important for anybody in this kind of a situation to reach out to a domestic violence counselor, find help through the National Domestic Violence Hotline. But it really is dangerous.
Bob, we have about 20 seconds left here. What do you think life is like for him, day in and day out, in prison now?
Well, first of all, for a guy like that, it's horrible because you're owned by the guards. You're owned by the prisoners. It's literally the second worst offense you can be in jail for, short of harming a child, especially sexual abuse with a child. So he is probably in seg in most of the instances. I'd imagine he's going to be preyed upon. And this is a guy that does not do well in those environments. So mentally, emotionally, and physically, he's in significant jeopardy and exactly where he should be.
Bob Bianchi, Siobhan Scott, always great to have your insight. I know your time is valuable, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. Folks, love is a strong emotion. It is beyond powerful. It can be a force that can fight off negativity and bring peace and joy. But when that emotion becomes unhinged, it can transform to jealousy, evil, and greed. And that, folks, is when it ends up right here on Court TV. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.